said we're both law professors.
Right, they go projecting things.
If you guys ever need to turn it off, you can just press the button down.
Oh, is it for the recording?
Because we're recording mainly, but if it gets annoying, it's okay. Hey everybody, thank you for coming out today to support Marcia and also your local independent bookstore. Your attendance and book purchases are what let us have these events, so we really appreciate it. This evening, we have the pleasure of hearing from Marcia Zug about her new book, You'll Do, A History of Marrying for Reasons Other Than Love, with Osamudia James. Marcia Zug is a family law professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law. She is a graduate of Dartmouth College and the Yale Law School. Her previous book, Buying a Bride, explored the history of mail-order marriage in the United States. She lives in Columbia, South Carolina, with her husband and 2 daughters. Osamudia James joined the UNC School of Law faculty in 2021. Her writing and teaching interests include education law, race in the law, administrative law, and torts. James is the author of numerous articles, book chapters, and popular press commentary exploring the interaction of law and identity in the context of public education. I hope you enjoy. Remember, you can get a copy of You'll Do up front after the talk if you have not already, and we'll do some more signing after the event as well at the table behind you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's my pleasure to be here with you, who I consider a friend and colleague. We've known each other
Since we had very small babies.
Exactly. We would see each other on the conference circuit with the babies.
At the wading pool. I think that's where we had our best ideas.
That's right. So I've asked Marcia to start off with reading a couple of sections of the book that have meaning for her, or say something about why she wrote it. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And is this on?
Doesn't sound okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just talk
Okay.
closer to it. Thank you all so much for coming. This is the first book tour that, or book reading that I've gotten to do. The book was just released on Tuesday, so this is really exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm going to read 2 different passages. They'll be fairly short. So You'll Do was inspired by the marriage of my great Aunt Rosie, a brave woman who didn't marry for love. In the 1930s, Rosie was working in a garment factory on Manhattan's Lower East Side. Like most of the workers, Rosie was Jewish. Her best friend in the factory was also Jewish, and both understood the dangers posed by the rise of fascism in Europe. Rosie and her friend were safe, but her friend's brother Saul was not. Saul lived in Poland, and as the Nazis rose to power, Saul's family began to fear for his life. They desperately sought to bring him to America, but the U.S.'s draconian immigration restrictions severely limited the immigration of undesirable groups, such as Jews. Saul was stuck. America would never grant his immigration application, with one exception: marriage. The only way to get Saul out of Poland and save his life was to marry him. So that's what Rosie did. In late 1937, as Nazi Germany was preparing for war, Rosie left the safety of America to marry a man she had never met and save his life. Saul entered the United States in September 1938. He moved in with Rosie. They had a daughter and fell in love. Rosie and Saul's story has a happy ending, yet it's a tale that haunts me. If Rosie hadn't married Saul, he almost certainly would have died in a Nazi concentration camp. Marriage saved his life, but only because of racist U.S. immigration law denied him entry in the first place. So that's the first story. And then I want to move to a much more modern one, and a little funnier one. So in 2007, the following post appeared in an online message board from a woman seeking a rich husband. What am I doing wrong? Okay, I'm tired of beating around the bush. I'm a beautiful, spectacularly beautiful, 25-year-old girl. I am articulate and classy. I am not from New York. I am looking to get married to a guy who makes at least $500,000 a year. I know how that sounds like a lot, but keep in mind that $1 million a year is middle class in New York City, so I don't think I'm overreaching at all. Are there guys who make $500,000 or more on this board? Any wives? Could you send me tips? I dated a businessman who makes average around $200,000, $250,000, but that's where I seem to hit a roadblock. $250,000 won't get me to Central Park West. I know a woman in my yoga class who is married to an investment banker and lives in Tribeca, and she's not as pretty as I am, nor is she a great genius. So what is she doing right? How do I get to her level? How do you decide marriage versus girlfriend? I am looking for marriage only. Please hold your insults. I'm putting myself out there in an honest way. Most beautiful women are superficial. At least I'm being upfront about it. I wouldn't be searching for these kinds of guys if I wasn't about to match them in looks, culture, sophistication, and keeping a nice home and hearth. She then receives a reply, but I will stop there.
That's the best part.
Oh, you want the reply? Okay, the reply. Okay, she received the following answer. I read your posting with great interest and have thought meaningfully about your dilemma. I offer the following analysis of your predicament. Firstly, I'm not wasting your time. I qualify as a guy who fits your bill. That is, I make more than $500,000 per year. That said, here's how I see it. Your offer, from the perspective of a guy like me, is plain and simple, a crappy business deal. Here's why. Cutting through all the BS, what you suggest is a simple trade. You bring your looks to the party and I bring my money. Fine, simple. But here's the rub. Your looks will fade and my money will likely continue into perpetuity. In fact, it is very likely that my income increases, but it's an absolute certainty that you won't be getting any more beautiful. So in economic terms, you are a depreciating asset and I am an earning asset. Not only are you a depreciating asset, your depreciation accelerates. Let me explain. You're 25 now and will likely stay pretty hot for the next 5 years, but less so each year. Then the fade begins in earnest. By 35, stick a fork in you. So in Wall Street terms, we would call you a trading position, not a buy and hold. Hence the rub, marriage. It doesn't make good business sense to buy you, which is what you're asking. So I'd rather lease. In case you think I'm being cruel, I would say the following. If my money were to go away, so would you. So when your beauty fades, I need an out. It's as simple as that. So a deal that makes sense is dating, not marriage. By the way, you could always find a way to make your own money. And then we wouldn't need to have this difficult conversation. With all that said, I must say you're going about it the right way. Classic pump and dump. I hope this is helpful. And if you want to enter into some sort of lease, let me know.
That's why I wanted her to read it. That's quite a response. Okay, so tell us why you picked these two passages.
Okay, they're obviously very different. Both of them really inspired the book. So the one about my great Aunt Rosie is a family story that I grew up hearing. It always struck me both as, heroic and romantic, but also deeply problematic. And you hear about green card marriages, marrying, immigration benefit marriages and how they're frowned upon. But then I had this story that the only reason he survived was because we had that benefit attaching to marriage. So in the back of my mind, it's one of those stories that I knew when I had a chance, it was something I wanted to explore more. And then the other one, it came out a long time ago. It came out right when I was starting to become a professor. And I guess because of the message boards and such that I was on as a family law professor, I saw it pop up a number of times. And the reactions were so interesting. Some were very supportive, some were outraged for each of the parties, right? It depended who you were, which way you felt. And I thought that was so interesting, that the idea of, in this case, marrying for money gets such a visceral reaction from people, but different, right? All sorts of different visceral reactions. And I felt there was really something there that if I had the chance to explore it, would be a lot of fun, but also really illuminating about our culture, about marriage, about America. So again, it was in the back of my mind. It's something I wanted to come back to. And I was really glad to have the opportunity in the book to post it.
Sure. I want to come back to some of the themes that came up in her post and then the response. But before then, I'm intrigued by the writing process. And something that was really noteworthy about the book were the stories, right? You'd open each chapter with one story or multiple stories detailing a phenomenon and then go on to talk about the history of it. But I found myself thinking, how did she get all the stories, right? How did you know which story was the right one? Did you catalog them? What was your writing process like?
I don't know that it was that well thought out, but I think I really want to be a history professor. I really think that's what it is. And, I became a law professor because I'm risk averse and there was a better market for it. But I think I really wanted to be a history professor. So I like the law, but I love the stories. I love the people, but I understand the law. So when I see these stories, I can put a legal explanation on them. And I think that's actually what I bring to these kinds of books that maybe a historian can't. They understand the legal pushes that are behind the stories. And with this book, I think I had a sense of the different chapters. Obviously, Marrying for Money, that's the one everyone knows. Everyone is going to expect a book about not marrying for love will have chapters on marrying for money. And I have two. The first one, the historic one, and then the last one, which is a modern examination of it. But then I was like, what else? What other reasons do people have? And some of these stories, or some of the ideas came from like people I know. I mean, if you start thinking about it, don't we all know people who married for not love reasons? And the way it's broken down, the second chapter is marrying for government benefits. A lot of us have heard of those. Third chapter is marrying for status and power. Fourth one that maybe people don't think about as much is marrying for criminal defense. I got some looks there. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's not, I'm not suggesting it. But it is absolutely a reason that people historically and today will get married. Chapter 5 is on marrying for parenthood benefits. And particularly for men, this is a really, really important one. So women are much more likely to have parental rights regardless of marriage, though there are various exceptions that I talk about when we get into divorce and custody. But for men, the best way to secure their parental rights is by marrying the mother of their children.
This is so interesting to me because we think about men as having all the rights and all the property. And, I've learned to think about men as at one point having their legal identity cover their wife's legal identity. And so when I got to that part of the book and realizing that that was one way that men had to secure rights was through marriage, I was surprised at this.
So one of the way I get at my male students and try to get them to care about like equal protection and sex discrimination is by explaining that this is one of the areas, family law, which I teach, that applies to them. Very strongly applies to them. I steal this from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? But I think a lot of times when you're a guy, so often you hear about the discrimination against women and you can be sympathetic and all of that, but with family law, you absolutely see it happening. And my students are, both male and female, are often shocked, but especially the men. And I actually have worked with a number of fathers' rights cases with men who have lost their kids because they weren't married. Had them actually adopted out despite the fact that they wanted custody of them. And this was shocking to them. We actually, me and a South Carolina father that I worked with just changed the adoption law in South Carolina to prevent that from happening in the future.
So to go into this idea of like what marriage gives you, the first part of the book really focuses on this idea of the marital bargain, right? That a little bit different from what we were just discussing, the idea that marriage really has benefits for women, and that's the way that they ensure that they are compensated in some way for the domestic labor that they do. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the marital bargain is what marriage used to be, right? Women had no source of income of their own historically. The way they would economically support themselves was through marriage. If you didn't get married, you basically had to live at home. You had to be a burden on your family. The only way to get out was marriage. But it was a deal that you were making. So the men weren't just supporting you, they were paying for wifely services. That was the bargain, that they would support their wives economically and their wives would provide the domestic services, housekeeping, cooking, child rearing, sexual services. I have a lot in the book about the fact that the only legal way to have sex was through marriage, and that was one of the clearly one of the benefits of marriage, right? So those were the services that women provided and that men paid for in the marital bargain. And I think over time, and we can talk about this a little bit more, that changed the idea that marriage was an economic arrangement in which both sides got something. And now, because we don't, sorry.
No, it's love now.
It's
right?
love. Marriage, you're supposed to marry for love.
Yeah.
And any idea of money coming into a marriage and a marriage motivations is seen as corrupting marriage, right? And the background of that, how love took over marriage, a lot of it was a reaction to the dangers of marriage. So you mentioned coverture. When women got married, they lost all legal identity. They were literally covered by their husband's legal identity. And that could be very risky, right? So you married someone, you're stuck in this marriage, and you're hoping that they're kind to you. But if they're not, there's not really anything you can do. Domestic abuse, marital rape, even if there wasn't the physical aspects, they don't have to share their money with you. So it's a risky proposition. So what a lot of women in the 19th century saw as the solution was marry a guy who loves you. Then at least you have a better shot that he won't do those things. So as they start advocating for love, it's to protect women. But women can't marry for love. It's not like the economic situation in the 19th century changed such that they could stop needing the support.
Sure.
So men could marry for love, but women couldn't marry for love. But what happens when you start promoting love is that women have to hide that they're not marrying for love. And you know what happens is that we forget about the economic bargain of marriage long before we have any shot of actually getting rid of the economic dependency that marriage is there to solve.
And you wrote, in the book that love is actually harder to prove, and there were challenges to the marriage, right? It was easier actually to say, well, look, I did these services in the home, and that's why I'm owed something. But once it became love, then you can make an accusation that the person actually never loved you. They just pretended, right? And so it ended up not helping women as much as I think people thought it might.
I mean, it helped some,
Sure.
right? And it also backfired in a lot of ways. That when you had the economic conception of marriage, there were legal claims that women could bring that the courts would recognize. They wouldn't care if you married for money because of course you were supposed to marry for money. So that didn't hurt your claim in getting alimony, let's say, or other types of marriage-based claims. But then once marriage is supposed to be about love, then they look at your motivations. And then if your motivations are wrong, or they decide they're wrong, or the court sympathizes with men. I mean, I have one case in there in which, I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, the judge apparently felt that he had made a bad choice. He was being faced with a breach of promise suit. He gets engaged to a woman. He decides he's really not that into her. But she says, if you don't marry me, I'm going to sue you for breach of promise. And the judge, not having that much money at the time, he wasn't a judge then, he was kind of poor, didn't want to pay the breach of promise. So he married her. And he regretted it for the rest of his life. So when this guy comes in front of him who breaches his promise to marry, he actually commends him. I am glad you did this. Thank goodness you didn't marry her. I can't believe that, I did, and I'm actually going to reward you by forcing her to pay you for you breaking off the engagement because, there's nothing worse than being in a loveless marriage, which may or may not be true, but that kind of decision wouldn't have happened in the past. That could only happen when love is supposed to be the only purpose of marriage. Then trying to force a man into a loveless marriage is evil, right?
Yeah. I was thinking about how love has overtaken our ideas of what an ideal marriage is, and then sometimes every once in a while you see a show about arranged marriages, right? Or the Indian matchmaker. And The idea in a lot of these shows is there are many things to marry for, that you marry for shared values, you marry for shared ambition, and that love can come later. And in fact, look at these marriages that we arrange, they're more stable. And I think the idea that your partner doesn't have to be your everything. And if you're thinking about marriage more holistically, you wouldn't expect them to be. And so do you think we are trapped by this idea of marrying just for love today? Are there ways in which we need to get out from under it?
I think marrying for love creates a lot of pressure. If love is the only reason that you get married, then anytime the love changes, and we know with long marriages, right, there are ups and downs, and it evolves. It's maybe not the same as when you first got married. That doesn't mean that you should get out of it, but if we're told that it should always be this one way, then I do think it makes people potentially a little more unhappy in their relationships. If you know that you're also marrying for stability, economic stability, and for the services they're providing, as long as they're still doing their marital bargain, you understand why you're still in that relationship. And my husband this morning actually, no, it's not a story about him particularly. He's read the book and he was reading Slate, and Slate has this Dear Prudence column, and he's like, oh, there was one this morning about a woman who was asking Prudence if she should marry a man she wasn't in love with. She was an artist, so she didn't make very much money. They were friends first. He has a lot of money. He really likes her. He's very kind. He's intelligent, but he's not good looking. And she doesn't have the passion. And she was asking Prudence if it was a bad idea to marry him. And I was interested to see what Prudence would say. And they actually said that's the marital bargain. That's historically what women, particularly like you, did in the past. And they were pushing her towards it. They said she should be honest.
Sure.
But I think this guy knew. I think they were like, he was friend zoned for a long time and like convinced her. And I don't know. They seemed saying that it would be a good idea for you to do this.
Sure.
And I also think he knew exactly what he was getting into. I think that's a lot of the untruthfulness with the fear of the gold digger. This idea that it's usually, I'm going to genderize it, that men tend to be blindsided. So the rich, older guy who's not particularly good looking, who marries the 25-year-old hot swimsuit model, is shocked when it turns out that she was interested in his money, right? Like, I mean, it's a marital bargain. They know what's going on.
So you mentioned the gold digger, and there is this societal idea that women in particular who are gold digging are bad people, and yet, you had a chapter called "The Government Loves a Gold Digger," right? There was all these ways in which the government was rewarding women financially for the marriage, right? And so could you say a little bit about that, and maybe if you have thoughts about why the contradiction, why do we reward marriage, but then, ostracize people who maybe it's more obvious that they're in it for the money?
Yeah, I think, well, the government has different goals, right? And so as a society, we've moved into marriage should be about love, but the government may not care so much if you're in love. What they care about is what they think marriage does. And there are lots of arguments for things that marriage does, but one of the things that the government thinks marriage does and encourages marriage to do is to be the social safety net, right? To keep people out of poverty. And why do they want to keep people out of poverty? Because if they don't, then the government has to pay for them, right? So they would like to have the poor people poor women be someone else's problem.
Sure.
And so historically, that is how a lot of our benefits are set up. They're specifically attached to marriage. They are incentivizing, it's usually women, to marry. And, you see this in the Social Security Act. You see this in the tax code, right? A lot of you have probably heard about the marriage penalty. That's for dual earners who make, about the same amount. Then marrying is maybe not such a good financial deal. It's a great financial deal if one of you is making a whole lot more money than the other one. That's what the government is rewarding. They want the higher earner to support them. I have a political cartoon in it where it's a picture of the IRS, and she's looking at the guy's tax return. She goes, with this income, oh, do I have a dependent for you, right? Like the idea that the government wants to not take care of, not to have to deal with poor people, not have to finance them, not have to support them, and that marriage is historically what the government has done to reduce their obligation to take care of people in poverty.
Yeah, marriage did a lot of work in the book, right? And so it's doing work for the government. I had a list of things that I saw marriage doing. It was conferring meaning on people. It was providing discounts. It was resulting to insurance perks. It was less probation for married people if they're involved in the criminal justice system. People who are married were more likely to get life-saving medical treatment. It guarantees men's parental rights. It establishes women's moral fitness for parenting. In Obergefell, it legitimized same-sex couples, right? Part of what made them people who deserved the right was that these were people who wanted to be married, and that was supposed to be such a good thing. And then, as you just said, it privatizes care. The state doesn't have to deal with it. What does it mean to have one institution do so much work?
I think it's good and bad, right? I mean, I think one of the concerns I have with marriage in general is that people don't realize all the stuff marriage does.
Yeah.
A lot of times, they know about some tax benefits. They know maybe about, visiting your spouse in the hospital. I was just over Christmas, I was with my sister, and one of her friends was debating whether or not to get married. They have a child together, but their income's similar, so they thought, maybe it didn't make sense. And I'm like, no, you should get married. And this, again, is not because I'm some sort of marriage fairy godmother and thinks everyone should get married, except for the fact that I think people don't realize that, because they were saying, oh, we'll just contract for the benefits that you could get through marriage. You cannot contract for the benefits. I mean, you can, a few of them, absolutely. But I teach this to my family law class. I have them raise their hand. I could ask you, but I won't do that. How many benefits do you think attach to marriage? First kid usually raises their hand. They go, a dozen? Next go, 50? 100? 1,000? And I say, and that's just federal benefits, right? And then not even adding on the state benefits. And some of these, if you actually want to go through and try to contract for the thousands of benefits that come from marriage, maybe some of them you can. Others are status benefits, which means you have to be married to have them, like immigration benefits. You can't decide that you and I are going to have a contract that I can bring you over as my not spouse in immigration law, right? It's a status-based benefit. I don't have the ability to contract for that one with you. So I think people think marriage, especially younger people, a lot of them think marriage is obsolete and it's an outdated institution. And that may be the case, socially, but legally it's not true. And that disconnect is dangerous because people don't realize what they're giving up when they don't get married. And then they find out when there's some right or benefit that they believe they should be entitled to and are not.
Sure. And so if something is so deeply embedded in society, then it makes sense that it's going to reflect other problems in society as well. And so some of the really sadder parts of the book were the ways in which marriage reinforces xenophobia, racism, sexism. And of course, I was struck by the discussion of the Osage Allotment Act, right? And the timing of this, given that the Killers of the Flower Moon has just come out. So you want to say more about that?
Yes. So I'm a family law professor. I also teach a class called Federal Indian Law. So I work very closely with Native American tribes. And, I had read Killers of the Flower Moon before it came out. And what you had asked earlier, how I get my stories, they sort of just stick. I read that story and I'm like, oh, this is also a marriage story. And I mean a legal marriage story. Because one of the things that was happening for the Osage, but also in a number of other circumstances, is that Native people were not considered full possessors of their rights. So what happens to the Osage, they're moved onto a reservation. The reservation turns out to have oil. So they're lucky, right? Mm-hmm. There's oil, they have the ability, they become, the members of the Osage tribe become some of the richest people in the country. But they're Indian. So the government says, you are legally incapable of taking care of your own money, so we need to appoint wards for you. The wards are white men who basically just steal their money. So what are you going to do if you're Osage? There's not that much you can do. But if you're a woman, if you marry a non-Indian man, then he can become your guardian and maybe stop the hemorrhaging of your money. So if you marry wisely, I don't want to say wisely, luckily, I don't know.
Like lucky enough that someone actually loves you and doesn't want the money.
Gosh, for the Osages, if you just lucky marry enough that they don't want to kill you.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the horror of that story. And so many of them weren't lucky like that. So legally, it's understandable why so many of these women married non-Indian men. They wanted to get out from under the thumb of these horrible guardians. The problem was so many of the men they married were just after their head rights, which is what the allotments are, the oil allotments. And the government, trying to protect Native people, prevented those rights from being bought or sold, because that happened a lot with land. As soon as Native people got their lands, they were basically immediately swindled out of their rights. So they can't sell their oil rights, but they can be inherited. So what are you going to do if you're an unscrupulous person? You marry them, and then you kill off your wife and her entire family. And that's what the story in Killers of the Flower Moon is. And it's very much related to, these two marriage motivations.
Right, the women trying to maintain some control over their property, and the men also using marriage to
circumvent the laws that prevent them from purchasing these rights.
Yeah. So, is there hope for marriage? Right? Is there a conception of marriage that, I don't know, does the good but doesn't do the bad? Is that too often? Is that even the right way to think about it?
I think what I have decided is the problem with marriage, the way we have it, is that it's often the exclusive way to obtain rights. And anytime you do that, then people are going to marry for those rights. And if these are important rights, coming back to my aunt's story, right? If the only way to get into this country and save your life is through marriage, that's a problem, right? But if we have marital immigration, and we also have asylum, we also have a real immigration system that allows people to come in other ways, then maybe having the marital immigration is not so concerning.
Sure.
So it's when we attach so many really important rights to marriage and then make them unavailable other ways, which is by and large what we've done, then I see that form of marriage as problematic and maybe one that can't be saved. The other side of it is that if we take away the exclusive rights, will people still get married? Right? There's a big push right now, again, because, in the family law world, you see this a lot. There's a push to get rid of no-fault divorce. There's a push that getting out of marriage is too easy. People aren't taking marriage seriously enough. Not enough people are getting married. So if you believe that, then you don't want to take away the incentives that do work to get people married. And because there's a real fear that if you don't attach these incentives to marry, then why get married? Love may not be a good enough reason to get married.
Sure. Okay, I want to do something a little lighter. The book, you mentioned some famous couples, and the book also made me think of some famous couples, and so I wanted to name these couples and then have you tell us what we should be seeing in their marriage, right? Or what phenomenon might be existing in their marriage that maybe the book gets through. Okay, ready?
It's like Jeopardy.
I'll start with an easy one, right? One you mentioned in the book yourself, Donald Trump and Melania.
Yeah, well, that's money on her part.
Yeah. And you said it was actually very clear. No one is debating that. It doesn't seem like anyone feels bad about that.
I don't think anyone is.
Yeah.
I don't think he's debating it.
Right.
literally at their wedding, there's a plane, a like little biplane flies over with a banner that says, "Melania, you're hired." Like, I mean, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's also on his third marriage. He's got a very strong prenup. She's not tricking him.
Yeah.
So why is he doing it? Well, she's beautiful, she's young, and his status, his manliness status is increased by being able to get a wife who looks like her. So I think theirs was a very clear bargain that, I mean, people are always asking, why are they still together? Why has this one lasted? I think it's because they know what they're getting out of it.
Sure.
She knew the deal when she married him.
Yeah, and in fact, you noted in the book that part of the delay of her moving into the White House was potentially so she could renegotiate the prenup, right? Very clear about this is a business arrangement,
Mm-hmm.
and if you want the benefit of me on your arm, we have to change this deal a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, there were lots of reasons that were floating around,
Sure.
but she kept saying, oh, I'm going to stay in New York because Barron has to finish school, but it was really to put pressure on her husband because it looked bad. People were like, where's your wife? Where's your wife? Oh, you want me to be a wife? You want me to be the first lady? That's a job that I actually didn't sign up for and that you're going to have to pay me for.
Yeah.
And he did.
And he's overinflated too, so hey.
It's good for her to renegotiate that. Michael Jackson and Debbie Rowe.
So I have that one also in the book, and I think people were often very confused about that marriage. They understood why he married Lisa Marie Presley, right? That's a big celebrity marriage and all of that. But Debbie Rowe, I think it was for parenthood. It's what I was talking about with it's hard for men to secure their rights as fathers. There's a lot of questions about whether Jackson is even the father of his kids. Whether or not, I mean, he was rich, he could have afforded a surrogate. But even surrogacy laws can be problematic. Marriage was the best way to secure his rights to the child, regardless of genetics. And then, no one would say anything. Adoption might have been very hard for him. There are rumors, that fly around with him that, you might not want to leave him with kids. So I think his was definitely for parenthood. For her, he may have paid her.
Sure.
So it might have been for money, maybe also for status, right? She was a nobody. She's like a dental hygienist or something.
No one knew who she was.
Right? And he's one of the most famous people in the world. And that's very attractive for a lot of people.
Yeah. Jay-Z and Beyonce.
I think that one may also be status and parenthood. I'll start. Well, I think they're intertwined. There's some of their status is as a power couple.
Sure.
And sort of like hashtag life goals,
Yeah.
right? They're this power couple. They're both rich and famous and beautiful. And then also they had the kids together and their kids are part of their package.
Mm-hmm.
And if they did it without marriage, they would be a different family.
Yeah.
One that our society, their fans, the press would have judged differently, I think. And I think they're, very smart and very savvy and they craft their image. And I think marriage is part of that image.
Sure. It was interesting in the book you talked about marriage being one way that people gain respectability, especially like Black people in the United States after emancipation. And after she married him, I think on the next tour, it was like the Miss Carter tour, right? And she had her audience say like, "Hello, Mrs. Carter," and there was a lot of think pieces about how for Black women in particular, marriage is still a form of respectability, and so she doesn't need to take his name. But she wore it as a badge of honor, as an I am married now too, and that gave her something even though she's one of the biggest stars in the world.
I mean, don't underestimate the status benefits of marriage, and particularly, I talk about this in the book as well, for disadvantaged groups that have had historically a harder time gaining that higher status.
Yeah.
One way to do it has been through marriage.
Yeah.
Now it's problematic in a lot of ways because it's emulating, white cultural forms of marriage, but I mean, I'm not gonna.
That's cachet.
Yeah, I'm not gonna judge them
Sure,
for that.
sure.
Like that's a issue critique in the law review, but I'm not gonna say that they
People
shouldn't. They should not do that.
Yeah. The other thing I thought about was that whether she was giving him status, because you talk about women getting status increases from husbands, but husbands not wanting to get a status increase from their wives. And given how big she is, I start thinking, who's getting the better end of this deal?
I mean, now I feel like I'm talking page 6 in rumors,
Sure.
right? But there are rumors that he cheated on her,
Yeah.
and
Oh, she made a whole album about it. So
yeah. So maybe it's not rumors.
Yeah.
And I think some of that might be related to potentially the loss of status. If I think when they got married, they were more equal. Maybe he was bigger,
Yeah.
and then she's clearly. I mean, he's successful, but she's
Stratosphere.
yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you reassert your manliness? Maybe by still seeming desirable by other people. And
Sure.
I'm so armchair analyzing their relationship here, and I don't have the background and the qualifications for it, but it's fun to do, right?
Yeah. Bill and Hillary.
Oh, that's totally power.
Yeah.
I mean, to be president, you have to be married. There's one exception, but basically, you have to be married. And so, for Bill, that was just one of the boxes he was going to have to check. I think he respected her. I think he absolutely felt he was gaining a lot in that marriage with her in particular, but he was going to be married. And for her, I have one of the examples I use in the book a lot is for women to gain political power. Marriage is the way to do it, and it worked for her to become senator, and she almost became president off it, right?
Yeah.
And there's something called the widow succession, that a third of the first female senators were widows of senators, and I have sort of a jokey article that I cite in the book, where the author says historically, one of the best ways to become a politician for a woman is to be the widow of a dead one. And I mean, this is not out of date. Julia Letlow is the most recent congressional widow. Her husband was elected to Congress during COVID, and he died of COVID, and she ran for office to replace him and got it. And the likelihood that she would have been elected otherwise is low.
Yeah. Right, I got one more question before I open it up to the audience.
Okay.
It was your dedication to the book, and you dedicated to several people, but also closed with to my husband, Jordy, who is sure to get grief for this book. And so I wanted to know, how has writing the book informed the way you look at your own marriage or the marriages of people who are close to you?
Well, given that my in-laws are in the audience, I'm going to say it has nothing to do with my marriage whatsoever. Mine was a pure love match, and none of these other things were a factor. Not at all. I think what it brought home is that there's no one way to do marriage. There's no right way to do marriage. That people marry for all sorts of reasons, and it doesn't make their marriages less good or bad. That we need to look at why people get married for these non-love reasons and decide whether there's something societally wrong with it, but not individually, right? Like, should marriage be the only way one can get this or that? But if you're in a marriage that you find fulfilling for whatever reason, that's a good marriage. And there are lots of things, I think you mentioned at the beginning, right, with the matchmakers and sort of blind dates and all those sorts of things. Statistically speaking, they are no less likely to work out than the love match. So it's not like we've figured out what the best type of marriage is. We have no idea. So if the marriage works for you, then it's a good marriage.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to throw it open to the audience if any of you have questions you'd like to ask.
One thing I've wondered about a lot is Baron Trump. He always sings the most miserable kid that you can imagine. He said, how many times has he ever appeared in a photograph smiling? And how do you work that into your calculations?
I don't think I've ever seen his mom smile.
Right.
I mean, it just may be an awful, like, parenting situation. But, I mean, if we say that marriage is so important, I mean, they stayed married. It's not, I mean, you know, one of the things that I talk about in the book is, and you mentioned this with Obergefell, is that we almost fetishize marriage as, you know, the most important institution. It's the path to happiness. Any other choice is bad, and it's going to, especially the harming children, right? Children who are born within a marriage are happy and healthy, and children who are born to single parents, well, you know, their life is going to be terrible.
And God forbid you break up the marriage while there are children there, then that's a terrible thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, you definitely, you're selfish and awful to do that. But if the implication is that Baron would be better off if his parents weren't together, because together they're worse than apart, then maybe that's a counterexample of being raised in a married couple is not necessarily the best thing there is.
I'd like to offer my insight into that because what happened was Amalia, she was very clever. She bought a house in Potomac for her parents, and that's where Barron lived, and he didn't live in the White House. So he went to a private school, and she protected him that way. So his grandparents were the center of his life, and still are.
And they're Eastern European, so maybe that's the lack of smiling.
Okay, that's a good observation. I don't know that. I went to the Grand Canyon to climb down and climb back up with my son Drew, and we met. There was one other couple with us. This was several years ago in March, and they came from D.C. and they were the ones who said this insight about the grandparents being the stable companions for their son, and not Trump.
I can see that.
Well, and to your point, she married maybe for money, but also there was the immigration aspect, right?
Yes,
and it gave her status here, and then she can bring over other family members, right?
Yes.
And all of that is done through marriage.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not her work visa, I know there were a bunch of stories about whether she was
visa or something.
Yeah, oh yeah, the genius. Yeah. But she certainly wouldn't have been able to bring over her family.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there is that chain migration. So you have to start with marriage, and that gave her citizenship, not just a visa.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I have to imagine, written from your perspective, that this is very much influenced by like the experience of people from the U.S. But I think about what you said about like politicians and women who are politicians only having this like respectability factor if they're married. But I can't help but think about like Jacinda Ardern, who's the Prime Minister of New Zealand and wasn't married for much of her time in office, and just recently, I believe, is married. So I'd like to think that isn't applicable necessarily everywhere in the world. And a question earlier was asked, like, is there hope for marriage? But I'd kind of like to pose a question on the other side of things, like, is there hope for single people, couples who don't desire to be married? Are there hope for individuals? Because this, like, the way that we look at people is either single or married, and there's no consideration for the human in between. Like, is there hope for a future that isn't necessarily so tied up in the value of marriage?
Great question. And Europe is very different. New Zealand, Australia, they're different. Like, marriage is important here because we have made it so important. So in Europe, you can get a lot of these benefits that I was talking about as being marriage exclusive without being married. So there are much lower incentives to get married in Europe, and the result is that people aren't getting married in Europe. And if America sees that as horrible, then we're not going to remove those incentives from marriage. So I don't know, maybe it's our Puritan past, but we've made a decision that we are currently continuing to make that we want to preference marriage. That during the same-sex marriage debates, there were questions about should we have civil unions, and we had some civil unions, but should we continue with civil unions? And some of the pushback with civil unions was that non-gay people were going to want them, right? That if we have multiple types of relationships that have different rights and benefits that come with them, then some people are going to want those. And we made the decision that no, we wanted marriage or not marriage, but we didn't want kind of a marriage light, because we like marriage so much. So is there a hope of not liking marriage so much? Not right now, I don't think. I think we're swinging back legally in the liking marriage so much. Individuals are marrying at lower and lower rates. And I think that'll happen too. So what happens if no one's getting married and there are all these benefits that you can only get through marriage? I guess at some point, the unmarried will rebel. But I think we're not there, partially because I think a lot of the unmarried still imagine themselves as future married. So it's okay because this is a status that they're going to be in eventually.
I mean, the book made a reference to Bridget Jones's diary and the phrase for single people, singletons, right? And that was different from like spinster, right? Or someone who's by themselves. And the idea was that trying to change the perception of what it meant to be unmarried. And I want, I'm not sure how much of a shift we have seen in the United States. I remember this about Jacinda Ardern as well. And then I also remember situations of looking at politicians who are unmarried but in a partnership, and the silliness that surrounded how they refer to, is that your boyfriend, right? Can you be the president and have a girlfriend, right? There was the way we make it juvenile if you're not married, and it's like your high school boyfriend as opposed to a partner, a life partner, and that is seen as serious as a husband or a wife.
Yeah, Bridget Jones, I mean, so it has singleton, it's supposed to be all about like empowering single women, and I mean the whole thing is about getting her married. Right? That's the end of the story. That's what makes it a happy ending.
That's the goal.
Right? That's the goal. I mean, I also talk about Sex in the City, and that's supposed to be one of those shows that was empowering for single women, but not really. It was showing that you can be single and have fun and go to great parties and wear great dresses, but the end goal is to get married.
And the triumph of the reboot was that she did get married. She got the guy, right? She got Chris North before he died on the Peloton in the show. But that was the triumph of it. Look, Carrie's finally happy. She married him.
Yeah, and the other thing that I talk about with that show is that she gets married, but she gets married with no compromise, right? She gets the rich, handsome guy who is willing to give her the ridiculous love, as she says, the all-consuming, and they skip over, this is why he has to die. They skip over the marriage part, because marriage can't be like that, the whole, for like 20 years. So you just get to the end, where then you could imagine that it was like that the whole time. They have a few scenes where he's like dancing with her and wine. I mean, I don't know, but I feel like I did a little bit more of the wine and the dancing over cooking dinner before I had the kids and, all of that. But in the show, they can just tie it up. Just tie it up like that.
And then they kill him, so we don't have to.
Then they kill him, so he can just be the perfect husband. Perfect husband is the dead husband.
That's exactly right.
This is being recorded.
Any other questions?
Yeah. David Brooks is writing recently on eulogizing the nuclear family and about kids moving back in with their parents and about rearing children from different kinds of relationships with the extended family and how that model seems to be growing. Do you think that's any kind of a pressure against traditional marriage?
I don't know if I'd say it's a pressure against it, but maybe it's a recognition that traditional marriage is really hard.
Yeah.
Like, once you have kids, having more people to help is awesome.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that was so hard for me was that I didn't have my family near me. And when it's just the two of you, without any help, and you're working and you have small kids, it's really, really hard. And I think it puts a lot more strain on your relationship then if there's a grandma who comes by, it's like, hey, I'm going to take those kids so you can sleep, so you can shower, so the two of you can go out and have a romantic dinner. So I am hoping that, more people is the wave of the future, but I'm not sure it means that the marital unit disappears. It just may be a recognition that the Leave It to Beaver isolated marital family is unrealistic
Right.
for creating happiness.
And that's where the pressure is on having that kind of myth of the family.
I think that's right.
It's a lot less pressure than you see in something like Beowulf, where clans had a priest would exchange a woman to be the peace bride to keep the two clans from fighting each other. But of course it didn't, and so she ended up with either a dead brother or a dead husband.
Yeah, I actually am thinking in the back of my head that the nugget for the next book is going to be kind of a marrying the enemy type of book. I love marriage, and yeah, certainly when women were married off to the enemies, literally like in Beowulf, to keep the peace. But I'm starting to collect stories as I read them, so that's it in mind. I'm like, there was an interesting one that didn't make it into this book that I was reading about. I'm doing an article about Eastern Native American tribes, and one of the stories I was reading was about how a lot of these Indian women in New England would purchase an enslaved man, and then they would marry him and free him if they liked him. And it's super messed up in a lot of ways.
Sure.
But like, if you marry your enslaver, like, that kind of feels like it goes into the marrying the end. I mean, I don't know. I don't have deep thoughts on it yet, but that's going to go into the next book as well. Those kinds of relationships where marriage, there are a lot of marriages that are exactly the opposite of based on love.
Based on like hate or antipathy.
Yeah, I mean, and what does that mean? And I don't know yet. It's going to be a couple years.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering if you're seeing any trends in the law. If it's marriage, laws relating to marriage, are they more or less static? Are they rapidly changing? Are they gradually changing? If there are changes, in what directions are they moving?
I think we're seeing a re-entrenchment of marriage, and I think that started with Obergefell. Like, Obergefell was our moment to potentially say, or the same-sex marriage debate was potentially the moment to say, you know what, marriage isn't inclusive and it's problematic, and maybe we should look at how these groups that have been denied marriage are able to create loving, stable families and without marriage, and the problem is maybe marriage, and instead it went in the other direction, that the problem was excluding same-sex couples from marriage, but not that marriage was a problem. So now same-sex couples are included in the marriage tent, which has made it almost worse for those who choose not to marry. Because if you couldn't choose to marry, right, then in some ways that choice could be more, or it wasn't a choice, so your family relationship could be more respected. And now you're more deviant again because you're choosing not to. And like I was saying earlier, the push for getting rid of no-fault divorce, I mean, I don't see that happening exactly, but the fact that it's on the table, it's not something that was really on the table 5 years ago.
That's interesting to me that it's changed just in that.
And I have thoughts on that. I mean, I think it's related to Dobbs, the abortion decision, that it does have to do a lot with women's autonomy. It's usually the people pushing for it tend to be men whose wives have left them, who are pissed off and are like, I didn't beat her, I didn't cheat on her, how dare she leave me? And they think it should be not her choice.
Well, that's the connection I would have made, but without knowing.
Jessica, hi. I went to high school with Jessica.
So I actually, you made this maybe too far out of your normal area of law, but I worked for the military on social and public health policy for a couple of years, and they really incentivize marriage. Military members tend to get married at a much younger age, tend to have more children. And my question is, what does the U.S. get out of this in your?
Oh, they get a lot. I mean, I don't do that much military. I touched on it a little, and I was also seeing some of these pro-marriage politicians touting the military and their high rates of marriage as the ideal. We need to be like the military. And my gut was that the military has a lot more advantages. And I mean, I think for like a fighting ready army, marriage is great, right? It means that if you get sent off, there's someone who's taking care of your kids, that you have someone to come home to, right? A reason to live or something. I mean, I don't know, but it seems I have various discussions about war brides. The military and marriage is fascinating, and they clearly think that married soldiers are better soldiers for, I think, a lot of different reasons that would be very interesting to look into. So they give them tons and tons of benefits. The bigger housing and
Or housing at all. At the junior range, younger soldiers members cannot actually even move out of the barracks unless they're married.
So yeah, they have lots of incentives to marry young, and to marry, maybe not for love.
Parts of the book talked about like the civilizing function of marriage, or the perceived civilizing function, that men who are married are more responsible, they're more grounded, less violent, because now they have a responsibility. Is there data to actually back into that up? I'm thinking, because especially the military obviously seems to believe this as well. So is that true?
I don't know. I mean, there are certain law professors who make this argument. Yeah. But it's a circular argument. I mean, on the data that they have, they say that married men are less violent and such, but also it may be that women are less likely to marry violent men. Yes. So, which comes first, and can you ever prove that? I don't know. The military certainly does seem to think that married men are more stable, and there's a long history of this. We were very worried during the colonial period about these roving bachelors who would just, impregnate women and leave them, and then they would become, a financial burden on the town. It's not that married men can't also impregnate people and leave them, but there was a belief that marriage had this civilizing influence, and we absolutely still think that. Whether it's true, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I taught for Campbell University on Fort Bragg, which is Fort Victory now, and there was a lot of abuse that went on, but there's also an incentive not to let that be public. So I think some of the statistics may be slightly skewed in terms of people coming back from violent situations with PTSD. I've had students to just stand there and shake looking at a textbook because their short-term memory was so shot. And I think some of that anger and vulnerability gets taken out on a spouse and on children in that kind of environment. But again, it is not made too public sometimes.
I mean, that also may be the deal that the U.S. is thinking of, and this sounds very twisted, but I've read things saying it, that, okay, their wives can be the outlet for that violence, and then we don't have to worry about the news stories of the military going off and doing things, our soldiers doing things where they're stationed in the general community. So I don't know if that, but there are arguments that have been made that is something that's being considered.
We're almost out of time, so last question.
On a different note, I'm wondering, so you spoke to the Osage Nation and have kind of alluded to other cultures and countries, but I guess how much of the book focuses on U.S. examples and stories of marriage versus other countries, or are there any non-Western examples? Okay, just curious.
I mean, only as in, I'll talk about Native American group, but it's still focused on America.
Sure.
I have some on England because we take so much of our law from Great Britain.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I mean, marriage is just our marriage is a very unique American institution. And to analyze us is to look at us. Other places do it completely differently, but being America, we don't care, right? Like, that, what you might feel comfortable with in another country as your legal relationships, your family relationships, we're going to do what we think is right for us. So I really wanted to focus on this uniquely, I think, American institution and where it comes from. And the only other place that it's really coming from is from Great Britain. So I have some of that in the historic parts.
Well, it has been a pleasure talking with you, and it was a pleasure to read the book. And so if you haven't, I highly recommend it. You do get a copy before you go. And we look forward to seeing what you do next.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so much fun. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks so much. Okay, you will tell me about
Do you just want my name, or do you want to?
Yeah, give me something like emotional so I can show people I know her. She didn't just sign my name. She was like,
Okay. I have to warn you, I spell everything wrong. So can I double check as I'm ready?
Yes, part of the charm.
Osamudia. No, I knew that.
Clearing out your place from me going to that house. And the dog was.
I think the mic was going in and out, so I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
No, you were doing perfect.
Yeah.
I'll replace the stories after, but sorry.
It's okay.